Have you ever been so deep in the wilderness that the night swallows every sound until something starts screaming out of the darkness? Not the yipping of coyotes, not the guttural call of a mountain lion, but something that makes your chest seize and your legs shake before your brain can even process it. That's what happened to us one summer in Utah, when we camped along the rim of a gorge that locals quietly avoided. It was July, blistering hot during the day, but cool once the desert sun dropped. There were 4 of us, me, my brother Dan, and our 2 buddies, Kyle and Eric. We'd all grown up hunting and camping across the West, so heading into the backcountry with rifles and handguns wasn't unusual. In fact, it felt stranger to be out there without one. We'd driven deep into the Utah desert, the kind of country where red cliffs stretch for miles and the dirt roads vanish into nothing. Our plan was simple: 3 days of camping, some target shooting, maybe a little hiking down into the gorge if it wasn't too brutal in the heat. By late afternoon, we pulled the truck off a narrow trail and found a flat patch of ground near the gorge rim. The view was something else. The canyon dropped away in jagged stone walls, the bottom invisible under the shadows. Even standing there in daylight, it looked endless, like the earth had just split open and swallowed the sky. We set up camp quickly. Tents staked down, fire ring built, coolers hauled out. The air smelled of dust and sagebrush, and the heat still clung to the rocks, radiating upward in waves. Dan unpacked his .30-06, and Kyle leaned his shotgun against a log, the way you'd set down a walking stick. None of it felt ominous, just normal gear for a trip this far out. When the sun dipped, the desert cooled fast. Stars came out in numbers you never see back in town, crowding the sky until it looked alive. We sat around the fire, cooking hot dogs on sticks, drinking a few beers and telling the usual stories. The crackle of the fire and the occasional pop of embers bouncing into the sand were the only sounds. Out here, there was no traffic hum, no plane overhead, no distant neighbors, just silence. But silence in the desert isn't empty. It feels heavy, pressing in around you. The canyon at our backs looked like a black mouth, wide open and weeping. Every so often I caught myself staring into that darkness, wondering how deep it really went. We all felt it, I think, though nobody said much. Just an occasional glance toward the gorge, then back to the fire. At that point, we had no idea what was waiting in there, or what we'd hear once the sun was gone for good. The fire had burned down low, and the desert night was colder than we'd expected. We were half asleep in our camp chairs when the first sound tore through the silence. At first, I thought it was a coyote. The pitch was high, sharp, like a yelp stretched too long. But then it rose, twisting upward into something that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. It was closer to a woman screaming, but out here, miles from the nearest town, that wasn't possible. Dan sat up straight, his head snapping toward the gorge. "You hear that?" he asked, though he already knew we had.
Another cry rang out, longer this time. The gorge caught it and threw it back at us, the echo bouncing between stone walls until it felt like it came from everywhere at once. "Mountain lion," Eric said, a little too quickly. "Gotta be. They sound weird sometimes. We'd all heard mountain lions before. This wasn't that. There was something off. Too stretched. Too human." Kyle stood, grabbed his shotgun, and racked it with a snap that made the hair rise on my arms. He wasn't aiming at anything, just holding it like a shield. "If it comes close, it's getting a round of buckshot," he muttered. The sound came again, closer now, cutting across the desert like it was only 100 yards away. The fire crackled, shadows dancing against the tents. My skin crawled with every echo. Dan grabbed his rifle and pointed it upward. "Screw this." He fired a single shot into the air. The blast ripped across the canyon, echoing like thunder. We all waited, ears ringing. The night went dead quiet. No wind, no crickets, not even the faint scuttle of insects. Just silence. Then, faintly, the scream came again. Only this time, it sounded fractured, like the echo was wrong, delayed, as if something was copying it a beat too late. Nobody spoke after that. We threw more wood on the fire and sat back to back in the glow, each of us listening to the canyon breathe. The minutes dragged into hours, and eventually the silence lulled us into restless sleep. But even then, I swear I could hear it, faint, almost under my dreams, that scream threading through the gorge. The desert sun woke us early, spilling light over the red cliffs until the shadows peeled back from the gorge. My head pounded from lack of sleep, and judging by the pale faces around the fire pit, I wasn't the only one who'd barely rested. "Still think it was a mountain lion?" Kyle asked as he kicked out the ashes.
Eric didn't answer. He was crouched near the coolers, frowning. "Guys, look at this." One of the lids was scratched to hell, long gouges across the plastic, like something had dragged claws or a knife through it. And beside it, a strip of our tarp had been shredded, hanging in ribbons. We stared at it for a long moment, the morning wind stirring the edges of the torn fabric. None of us had heard anything that night beyond those screams, but something had been close enough to tear into our stuff without waking us. Dan swore under his breath, slinging his rifle over his shoulder. "Let's see what's out there." We hiked toward the gorge, boots crunching on loose rock. The canyon stretched open before us, vast and empty, but eerily silent. Not a bird in the sky, not an insect buzzing. Just that oppressive quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. For a while, we stood there staring into that silent abyss, each of us lost in the same thought. Something down there had been screaming, something close enough to reach us in the night. "Let's head back," Dan finally said, shifting the rifle in his hands. "We'll stick close to camp. If it shows up again, we'll be ready."
No one argued. We were armed, we were experienced, and we told ourselves we could handle whatever the desert threw at us. But none of us said what we were really thinking. That whatever had screamed out of that gorge didn't feel like something we knew how to fight. The second evening fell fast. Out in the desert, the sun doesn't sink, it drops. One moment the cliffs burned red and gold, and the next, shadows swallowed everything. By the time we had dinner going, the gorge was already a black wound at our backs. None of us said it aloud, but everyone stayed closer to the fire that night. Guns weren't casually leaned against logs anymore. They were in our laps, hands resting on stocks and grips, like we were waiting for something. Even Eric, usually the calmest of us, kept his pistol holstered at his hip. The silence pressed heavier than before. No owls, no crickets. Even the breeze had died. It was like the desert itself was holding its breath. Around 1 in the morning, it started again. The scream cut through the stillness, longer and sharper than the night before. This time, it didn't sound far away. It sounded just beyond the firelight, echoing up from the gorge and around us at the same time. We froze, every muscle locked as the sound twisted from a high wail into a guttural roar. It was human. It was animal. It was both and neither. Dan whispered, "That's not a lion. That's not anything I've ever heard." Before anyone could answer, another scream ripped through the night closer. So close it felt like it was inside the circle of light. Kyle stood, shotgun up, swinging toward the gorge. His voice cracked, "You come in here, you're getting blasted."
In that moment, I saw it. Just at the edge of the firelight, crouched low against the dirt. A pale shape, too pale for the desert. Limbs bent at angles that didn't look right. It wasn't more than a second, just enough for my brain to register before the fire popped and the shadows shifted. When I looked again, nothing was there. My stomach dropped. I wanted to tell them, but the words stuck in my throat. If I spoke it, it would make it real. Dan fired into the darkness, the rifle's crack tear in the silence. The echo chased itself through the canyon like thunder rolling forever. The screams stopped, not faded, stopped, cut clean. We sat there, eyes darting, breaths held, waiting for it to come again. But the desert stayed silent, smothering. Nobody slept. We sat by that fire until dawn, guns never leaving our hands, shadows stretching and shifting around us. And all night long, I kept replaying that glimpse in my mind, the pale, crouched figure just outside the firelight, waiting. By sunrise, we were wrecks. None of us had closed our eyes, and every snap of a twig or shift of the fire had kept our nerves strung tight as wire. When the light finally broke across the desert, I thought it would feel like relief. It didn't. The gorge looked worse in daylight, like a black scar cutting through the earth, swallowing every sound. While we packed the breakfast gear, Kyle froze by the tents. Guys?" We crowded around. The sand all around our camp was marked with prints, boot-shaped, but wrong. Too long, too narrow. Some had 6 impressions instead of 5, like stretched out toes. They circled the tents in deliberate loops, as if whatever had made them had walked around us again and again while we sat clutching our guns by the fire. Dan crouched, running his hand across one. "These aren't ours." His voice was flat. No one argued this time. By afternoon, we debated leaving. Eric wanted to cut the trip short, but Kyle pushed back, saying we were armed and that whatever it was, it hadn't attacked us.
just screamed, circled, stalked. "It's probably trying to scare us off," he said, though his eyes betrayed how little he believed it. That night, the desert grew darker than before. The firelight barely seemed to push back against the shadows. We sat close, whispering more than talking, every gun within reach. Then the rocks started. Small ones at first, pebbles dropping into the campfire, scattering sparks. Then larger ones, thunking against the cooler, skipping off the dirt beside our chairs. "What the hell?" Eric started, but another scream drowned him out. This one was so close it vibrated in my chest, like the gorge itself was howling. I whipped my flashlight toward the sound, and the beam hit movement. Not eyes, not directly, but a glint off something pale between the junipers, low to the ground, shifting, watching. Dan cursed and fired a shot into the brush. Silence. Then, from the opposite side of camp, another scream, even louder. Panic cracked through us. Kyle shouted, swinging his shotgun back and forth. Rocks rained harder, pelting the tents, rolling across the dirt. One hit Eric in the shoulder, hard enough to make him stumble. That was it. Dan stood, grabbed his pack, and barked, "We're leaving, now." In a frenzy, we shoved gear half-packed into bags, yanking up tent stakes with shaking hands. The fire hissed as someone kicked dirt over it, plunging us into near darkness with only our flashlights cutting through the black. The last scream came as we stumbled toward the truck, gear slung haphazardly, guns in our hands, louder than any before. Not from the gorge this time, but from just behind us, so close I could swear I felt the breath of it on my neck. We didn't stop running until the truck was in sight. We threw our gear into the truck bed without caring what broke or spilled. The cab doors slammed and Dan jammed the keys into the ignition with hands that wouldn't stop shaking. The engine roared, tires spitting gravel as we tore down that dirt track, headlights carving frantic beams across the desert. No one spoke for miles. The silence inside the cab was as sharp as the screams had been. Each of us staring straight ahead, afraid that if we looked out the window, we'd see something running alongside us in the dark. By the time we hit the highway, the sun was rising. Only then did we start to breathe again. The desert behind us glowing gold like nothing had ever been wrong. At the nearest ranger station, we told them what we'd heard, what we'd seen, and showed them the torn cooler lid. They listened politely, then shrugged it off, said mountain lions could make noises that sounded human, and claw marks could come from raccoons or bears. But when we mentioned the stone stacks and the boot-shaped prints, the ranger just went quiet. After a long pause, he muttered, "You're not the first to say that about the gorge." That was all. No report filed, no search, just a vague warning to be careful. It's been years since that trip, but sometimes when I'm camping alone and the wind shifts just right, I swear I can hear it again. Faint, drawn out, riding the night air. A scream that isn't animal, isn't human. A scream that belongs to the gorge. And I know, deep down, that it's still out there.
Out in the backcountry, voices carry strange on the wind. Sometimes it's an echo, sometimes just the forest throwing your words back at you. But what would you do if the voice calling from the trees wasn't just repeating you, it was your own voice. Not a trick of sound, not some stranger yelling back, but something mimicking you with just enough delay to make your blood run cold. That's what we faced on the hollow trail, 3 days into a backpacking trip we never should have taken. There were 3 of us, me, my girlfriend Rachel, and my old college buddy Mike. We'd planned the trip for months, a 5-day loop through one of the most remote stretches of Oregon wilderness. The maps showed almost no traffic on the trail. The ranger at the station joked that most people gave up after the first day. That was exactly what we wanted. Solitude, clean air, and the kind of silence you can't get anywhere near a road. We carried everything on our backs: tents, food, water filters, and, because this was Oregon backcountry, our sidearms. Rachel had her .38 tucked into a hip holster. I carried a compact 9mm, and Mike had brought along his .357 revolver. None of us expected to use them, but out here, bears, cougars, and even the occasional aggressive stranger weren't out of the question. Better to have them than not. The first 2 days passed without trouble. The trail wound through thick pine forest, then climbed into higher ground, where the air grew colder and the trees pressed close on all sides. We saw deer once, a few chipmunks, and plenty of birds, but otherwise it was just us and the endless sweep of green. On the 3rd day, we set camp in a small clearing where the trail dipped into a hollow. The trees leaned over us, branches knitting together so tightly that only a few slivers of sky showed through. It was quiet, too quiet, the kind of quiet that makes you think the forest is listening. We set up camp, cooked noodles over the stove, and watched the firelight push back against the dark. It should have felt peaceful, but I couldn't shake the weight of those trees crowding around us. Rachel admitted later she felt the same way, that the place seemed wrong. That night, after we crawled into our tents, I lay awake listening to the creak of the branches, and that's when I heard it, my name drifting in from the forest, soft, wrong, like I was hearing myself call out from the trees. At first, I thought I'd dreamed it, my name spoken low and clear from the dark, like someone standing just outside the tent flap, whispering. I held my breath, listening. The fire had burned out hours ago. The forest was black, silent, even the wind gone still. Then it came again. Jake! It was my own voice, flat, almost hollow, but unmistakably mine. Rachel? I whispered, but she was already sitting up beside me, eyes wide in the dim glow of her headlamp. She shook her head. From the other tent, Mike muttered, "You guys hear that?" His voice was shaky. Before we could answer, the call came again, this time speaking his name. Mike. Same tone, same rhythm, but a beat too late, like someone trying to learn how to talk. Rachel scrambled for her revolver, unzipping the tent fast. I followed, gun in hand, flashlight cutting a shaky beam through the trees. Nothing. Just rows of trunks disappearing into black. Mike joined us, pale as the moonlight. "That's not an echo," he hissed. We stood in a circle, flashlights sweeping, hearts hammering. The air felt wrong, heavy, like the forest was waiting. I raised my pistol, firing a warning shot skyward. The blast cracked through the trees, echoing back, normal at first, but then, a second later, the echo came again, just slightly delayed, warped, like something else was repeating it. That's when Rachel whispered, "It's not just copying voices, it's copying us." None of us slept after that. We stayed huddled by the dead fire pit, flashlights and guns ready, waiting for the next whisper. But after that warped echo faded, the woods went silent again, oppressively silent, like the whole forest had shut itself off. When the first light broke through the branches, it felt like a lifeline. The three of us dragged ourselves up, exhausted, nerves frayed raw. Mike was the first to notice something wrong. "Did you guys move this?" he asked, pointing to his pack. It was sitting a few feet from where he'd left it, straps undone, contents shifted, like someone had rummaged through it. My stomach dropped when I checked our cooler bag, zippers half open, food wrappers scattered in the dirt. Nothing was missing, but everything had been touched. Then Rachel let out a low curse. In the sand, just beyond the tents, were prints. Not boots, not animals. Long impressions, shaped like feet, but stretched unnaturally, as if someone had pressed down with too many toes. They circled the camp, looping close, then trailing back into the trees. And there was something else. Near the tree line, someone, something, had arranged rocks into neat spirals, stacked carefully in patterns too deliberate to be an accident. I tried to reason it out. Maybe other hikers? A prank? But we hadn't seen another soul since stepping on the trail, and these woods were remote enough most people avoided them. Rachel's voice was low, tight. It was here. Whatever was copying us last night, it walked right into camp. None of us wanted to admit it, but we all felt the same thing. This wasn't just the forest playing tricks. Something intelligent was out there, watching. Still, Mike insisted we push on, another day deeper into the loop. "We came here for the hike," he said, trying to sound steady. "Let's just finish it. It's nothing we can't handle." I wanted to argue, but I didn't. Maybe because I was scared to admit out loud that I thought we were in over our heads. So we packed up, cinched down our gear, and stepped back onto the trail. But from then on, every snapped twig, every bird call cut short, made me feel like the forest wasn't just around us, it was following us. By the time the sun slipped behind the trees, the forest felt tighter than ever, the branches closing in overhead like a cage. We set camp on a narrow strip of flat ground, barely wide enough for the tents. No fire that night. We all agreed the smoke might draw attention. Not that we needed it. Whatever was out here already knew exactly where we were. Dinner was silent. Even Mike had stopped trying to act casual. Every sound, the clink of a pot, the crunch of a branch underfoot, felt too loud. The forest itself seemed to be listening. We crawled into the tents early. weapons close. For hours, nothing happened. The woods stayed black, still, heavy, with a silence that pressed into our ears. I almost let myself believe we'd imagined the night before. Almost. Then it started. "Jake." The voice drifted in from the dark. My name, whispered in that same flat, hollow tone. Then Rachel's, "Rachel." Then Mike's, "Mike." We held our breath. No one moved. And then, all at once, the voices overlapped, calling our names again and again from different directions, like a broken record scattered through the trees. My chest locked tight, because I realized it wasn't just names anymore. It was our words, sentences we'd spoken earlier in the day. Mike complaining about the trail being steep, Rachel laughing about her blister. Each phrase parroted back in our own voices, warped and delayed, echoing around the camp like the woods themselves were mocking us. "Stop!" Rachel shouted suddenly, her voice cracking. "Shut up!" The forest went dead still. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. Nothing breathed. Then a soft whistle started, low and deliberate. My stomach turned to ice. It was the same tune Mike had whistled on the trail that afternoon. Perfect. Identical. A rock hit the side of my tent, then another, then more, pelting us from all sides. I heard branches snapping just beyond the clearing, something heavy circling. I ripped the zipper down and aimed my flashlight. For half a second, the beam caught movement, something tall slipping between the trees, pale and long-limbed, gone before my brain could even lock on. I raised my pistol and fired. The gunshot tore through the night, but instead of fading, the report came back a moment later, delayed, warped, like something else was repeating the sound. Rachel screamed, Mike swore, and the forest answered us back in our own voices. We couldn't take it anymore. Rocks clattered through the clearing, voices circling us in every direction, repeating our own words back at us. The air was so thick with sound it felt like the forest was breathing them into our ears. "Pack up, we're leaving now," Mike barked, already yanking his gear out of the tent. There was no argument. We shoved what we could into our packs, leaving half of it behind. Flashlights cut thin tunnels of light through the black trees as we stumbled onto the trail, guns shaking in our hands. The voices followed, not behind us, not in front, but everywhere. My name hissed from the treetops. Rachel's voice called from the brush at our feet. Mike's laugh echoed from somewhere deep in the woods, stretched and wrong. Every few steps, I swore I heard something running just out of sight, keeping pace with us. Once, I swung my light sideways and caught two pale shapes, legs maybe, vanishing behind a tree. We pushed harder, half running, half tripping over roots and rocks. Every time we tried to speak, the forest threw it back at us, delayed, twisted. It was like being trapped inside a broken mirror, where every reflection was alive. Rachel fired a shot into the dark. The echo came back a moment later, too slow, followed by a laugh. Her laugh, only hollow and empty, spilling from the trees. By the time the horizon paled with dawn, our legs were rubber and our throats raw. But the trailhead appeared like a miracle, gravel crunching under our boots as the parking lot came into view. We collapsed against the truck, gulping air like we'd been drowning. And just like that, the voices stopped. No echoes, no footsteps, no warped words, only silence, as if the forest had swallowed everything back down. We drove without a word, leaving the hollow trail behind us. Later, I tried to find reports, anything to explain it. I found only scraps. Hikers who'd gone missing in that same area, stories of people hearing their own voices in the trees, warnings passed in whispers at ranger stations. I don't know what was in those woods. I just know it watched us, learned us, and spoke with our mouths. And sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I hear myself calling from somewhere.
High in the mountains, darkness is absolute. No street lamps, no houses, no glow from distant towns, just endless black between the trees. That's why, on our second night in the Appalachians, the sight of soft, glowing lanterns weaving through the forest should have been comforting. It meant people, right? Other hunters, other campers. But when we called out, the lights vanished. And when they came back, there were more of them, drifting closer, circling us, moving in ways no lantern or flashlight ever could. There were 3 of us on that trip. Me, my cousin Tom, and our buddy Ray. All of us had grown up hunting, spending fall weekends out in the backcountry, rifles slung over our shoulders like it was second nature. This trip wasn't anything unusual. A week, chasing deer in the Appalachian highlands. Just us, our gear, and the kind of quiet you can't buy anywhere else. We hiked most of the day before setting camp on a flat rise above a creek. The forest stretched thick around us, hardwoods packed so tight they cut out most of the sky. Our tent circled a small fire, rifles leaning against logs, boots drying from the long hike in. The air was crisp that night, smelling of pine and wood smoke. We ate jerky and beans straight from the can, telling stories in low voices while sparks rose into the canopy. Normal camp stuff. But even then, I remember feeling watched, like the forest had gone too still, too quiet. I told myself it was just the altitude, or my imagination getting the best of me. After all, we were armed, experienced, and alone. What could happen out here that we couldn't handle? Turns out, plenty. It was close to midnight when we noticed them. The fire had burned down to embers, and we was just about to call it a night when Tom stiffened, staring past the tents into the trees. "Hey, you see that?" he whispered. At first I thought it was fireflies, but the glow was too steady, too big. A faint, golden white light drifted between the trunks about 30 yards out. Then another one, a little further off, bobbing gently like someone carrying a lantern through the forest. "Must be hikers," Ray said, though his voice didn't sound convinced. Out here, miles from the nearest road, hikers at midnight made no sense. We called out anyway. "Hey, you guys lost?" The lights paused, hung there in the dark for a long moment. And then, just as suddenly, they blinked out, as if they'd never been there at all. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Even the night insects seemed to hold their breath. Flashlights don't just shut off like that, Tom muttered. We waited, listening, watching the shadows between the trees. Nothing. Eventually, we crawled into our tents, trying to laugh it off. Just other campers, probably, or some trick of our tired eyes. But I knew better. I'd seen the way those lights moved, smooth, deliberate, weaving between the trees like they knew exactly where we were. And I couldn't shake the feeling that when they went out, it wasn't because they'd left. It was because they were waiting. The lights returned the next night. We were sitting around the fire again, trying to act normal, though none of us had slept much. Around 10 p.m., Ray froze mid-sentence, his eyes cutting toward the dark. They were back. 2, 3, no, 4 of them this time. Glowing, lantern-like orbs weaving through the trees, silent and steady. They didn't sway like a person walking with a light. They glided, too smooth, too controlled. Not hackers, Tom muttered, clutching his rifle. We stood, flashlights raised, but the beams never seemed to reach far enough. The lights hovered just beyond their reach, slipping between trunks, darting out of sight only to reappear on the other side. And then we realized there weren't just 4, there were more. Half a dozen, maybe more, drifting all around us in a loose circle. Ray cupped his hands and shouted, "Hey, who's out there?" The lights went still, hung in the black like suspended stars. No answer, no footsteps, just the low crackle of our fire and the hammering of our hearts. Then, without warning, they shot closer, fast, weaving between trees until they were barely 20 yards out. Tom cursed under his breath, raised his rifle, and fired into the dark. The blast shattered the silence, echoing off the gorge walls. For a heartbeat, the light scattered, vanishing into the trees. Relief washed over me until they blinked back on, even closer than before. "Jesus Christ," Ray whispered, backing toward camp. His face was pale, eyes fixed on one light that hovered just outside the fire's glow. Something about him was hypnotic. The longer you stared, the harder it was to look away. Ray started moving toward one, slowly at first, like he was drawn to it. "Ray, stop!" I hissed. He didn't answer, didn't even glance back. His rifle dangled loose in his hand as he stepped past the tents, eyes locked on the floating glow. The light drifted backwards into the trees, and he followed like a moth chasing a flame. By the time Tom and I lunged after him, both Ray and the light had vanished into the forest. We called his name until our throats were raw. The forest gave nothing back. No footsteps, not snapping branches, not even an echo. Just silence, heavy and suffocating. We searched with flashlights for hours, weaving through the trees, rifles ready, hearts pounding. The lights were gone, every last one, as if they'd never existed. By dawn, we stumbled back into camp, exhausted and shaken. That's when Tom found it, Ray's rifle, propped neatly against a tree at the edge of the clearing. No footprints led away. No gear, no sign of a struggle. Just the gun, waiting, like he'd set it down calmly before walking into the woods. We left that morning, packed in silence, shouldered our gear, and marched down the trail without looking back. Neither of us wanted to admit the truth out loud, that Ray hadn't just wandered off, he'd been taken. The Rangers logged him as a missing hiker. They said people get lost in those mountains all the time, but I knew better. I knew what we'd seen. Sometimes, late at night, I still catch a glimpse of faint golden light flickering in the trees near my house. Too far to make out clearly, but close enough to raise the hair on my arms. And every time, I wonder if it's the same lights we saw in the Appalachians, if they followed us home, or worse, if it's Ray trying to lead